reason we sponsor it and the reason we're involved in creating it is because we think people learn best by doing. So we wanted to create a hands-on environment where they could play with new tools that they might not get exposure to. And if you go to some of our bigger events in cities that we haven't come to for the first time, you will find a broad spectrum of people, from people just starting out in the industry to people who've been in the industry for a long time, but maybe their workplace doesn't provide access to the tooling that they want. And what we're keen about is that people just have an opportunity to play with things, and it is an environment where we encourage play. So feel free to come along, tell your friends, tell them not to worry if they work for one of our competitors, because this isn't about us, and we want them to come in and we want them to play. We're expanding in Manchester. We are really thrilled with the amount of turnout we got for our first event that, you know, we didn't necessarily know we were going to be able to host in Manchester until recently. So it's really good that so many of you turned up for this event. I think we're looking at about 50 odd people joining online, and I'm sure that'll be more as the day goes on. So, you know, it's exciting to see the turnout. It's a terrifically exciting topic. We've got Thomas here to talk tonight. He's our capability lead for testing and test automation in Global Logic, fantastically experienced. We've got his colleague Grace, who works within his capability. She's amazing, should have won several awards, but has often been a finalist. You know, corruption at play, must have been. So anyway, so I hope everyone really enjoys the event. And if you want to stick around afterwards, there will be pizza to go with some of the beers that you've already had. So yeah, with no further ado, I'll hand over to our presenters.
Okay, right. I'm all right, I'm already up here.
Are you all mic'd?
I'm good, I'm properly mic'd.
Cheers.
Cheers, right. So have I been? Yes, I have been switched on. Good. Okay. Yeah. So thank you all for coming along today. My name is Thomas Shipley, and I'll be talking to you about Pact and consumer-driven contract testing, and a new way, really, of testing APIs that is driven by your consumers. And there's only so long I can vamp without my slides on the screen. So hopefully the techs at the back are going to do their part, and they're going to show up. Thank you very much. Okay. So let's get started. I'm also here with Grace, who's already been introduced. She's going to be doing the more important part of this playground, the actual hands-on bit. I'm going to bore you, well, maybe not bore you for 20 minutes, and talk about the ideas and the concepts behind this. So verifying relationships, consumer-driven contract testing, and microservices. So today I want to talk to you about relationships and how important they are in a microservice architecture. And I'd like to start with a question, which you are free to shout out if you think you know the answer. Maybe you will have guessed from the title. Why are social networks valuable? What is it that gives social networks their value to advertisers and other groups? Want to have a go? No? Sorry, I can't hear. Data? Yeah, okay, that's probably a better answer than what I've got, but it doesn't match with my title. So instead, I'm going to go with relationships. It's relationships that make social networks valuable. Thanks, Zoe. It makes them valuable because while there's a bit of data that advertisers can get some value from, like about an individual, their date of birth, their name, and so on, that data becomes so much more valuable, so much richer when it forms connections with other people in that social network. We start to understand about brands that that individual likes, their friend group, where they like to go. It all gets a little bit creepy. So, leading question, why are microservices valuable? No, you're not following along. It's a leading question. Relationships are what make microservices valuable. And it's the same reason. So a microservice on its own, by definition, is limited in scope. It can only do a few things. You might have an accounts microservice. You might have a cart microservice, maybe an order microservice. But those things in isolation are not valuable. They're not a business system. It's only when those microservices come together, form relationships, that's when you get a business system. And so before I get to the but, relationships are more important than microservices. So often we focus on microservice architecture when we should be talking about relationships. But we're bad at testing relationships. all the current ways, or the old ways at least, that we've used in the past of testing relationships have significant flaws. And funnily enough, I'm going to talk about them. So how do we test relationships? So we'll start off here at the beginning of the story with our typical options. We've got integration testing and we've got end-to-end testing. And they're kind of similar to each other. They're both slow. They're slow for multiple reasons, in part because you have to set up the environments, you have to map a user journey either end-to-end or through part of a user journey, and that's still slow. And that makes them brittle as well. Because you're mapping a user journey, there's lots of moving parts. There's lots of different APIs, microservices, lots of data backends and so on that are involved in that journey. And all those different bits can fail and cause your tests to fail, and that makes them brittle. They're also broad. So if you ever think about coding and programming, you often want a tight scope when you're coding in your functions and methods, your loops, your constructs, because that makes them more secure, it makes them less prone to failure. But with these types of tests, they are by definition broad, and that makes them brittle still. And because of all this, because they're slow, broad, and brittle, it makes them expensive. It takes a lot of time to maintain these tests. It takes a lot of time to investigate when they go wrong. Do they go wrong for a valid reason? So often when I speak to teams and to clients, they say to me, that's okay, I've got the solution, we'll just mock them. We'll just mock those tests, and that problem goes away. But mocks don't test relationships. In fact, mocks remove relationships from your tests by their very nature. When you introduce a mock, what you're saying is, I don't want to use the actual service, I want to use this one that I've made up. So you're not testing the relationship. Worse still, they go out of date. A mock is a fixed moment in time. Typically, in my experience, and certainly when I've set up mocks in the past, I'll make a call to an API, I'll get the actual response, I'll then put it into my mock, and I'll never look at it again. I'll never look at it again until perhaps the test fails, and then I have to ask the question, did the test fail for a genuine reason, or was it because of my mock? And they're rarely verified as well. And so the test will pass, even if the mock service changes. And that's really dangerous. If you rely too much on mocks, then at some point your test will drift, you may not notice, and you may be getting a full green suite of tests when actually your product has changed fundamentally. So don't use mocks. So what about contract tests? Well, there's a subtlety in this title. It's not consumer-driven contract tests, but contract tests themselves. And contract tests have a circular problem about them. So you may have noticed this in teams that you've worked in the past. Certainly I've seen it in teams that I've worked with. A contract test starts off where a team makes assumptions about their API, how it's going to be used by their clients. And then they write tests that form around those assumptions. And funnily enough, when you run those tests, they prove the assumptions that they've been coded around. And so it becomes this circular problem. You're not actually looking at the relationships, you're just looking at what that team thinks will happen with their API when used by clients. So also terrible. But consumer-driven contract tests fix these problems. And they fix them because they're consumer-driven. That's the difference. Welcome, come on in. Consumer-driven contract tests test relationships, and that's the key. And that's what makes them so powerful. And they do so in a way that's fast. And I'll talk to you a little bit about why it's fast. And also robust, because ultimately there are a couple of unit tests testing these relationships that just happen to talk to each other. So that makes them fast, robust. It also makes them tightly scoped. Less things can go wrong because they're not broad. They're focusing on one relationship at a time. That then makes them cheap because they take a lot less maintenance. They test a lot less at once. That makes them easier to write. And finally, they're not circular. We're actually going to look at the relationships. We're not just going to code in what we believe that relationship will be. So I'd like to go through a worked example before you get into your lab so that you have an idea in your head of how this might work. This example here is pretty much exactly how Pact works. So if you understand this, and it's relatively straightforward, I hope, you should be okay with the lab. So it's got 3 stages, and we're going to start off at the top. I feel like a weather presenter. You've got the consumer and you've got the provider. And the consumer is the person that consumes that API. They are the person that takes that API in, puts it into their product, it provides value. Maybe it's an Android team and they've got an app and they connect to the accounts API that's handled by a different team. So the consumer is going to write a consumer test, and that's going to connect to a mock server, and during that test, it's just going to behave like a unit test with a mock server attached to it, funnily enough. So it's just going to go through, it's going to send off requests, they're going to go to the mock server, they're going to get the mock back, and they're going to keep testing. So it's really fast because they're not having to rely on any APIs anywhere. They just make requests, get responses, keep going, keep going, keep going. Apart from one fundamental difference, and that's the contract file. So at the end of that test, we're going to generate a contract file. And that contract file, you can think of it like a forensic log. It's going to detail everything that happened during that test session. All the requests that were made, the responses expected back, the response codes, everything. It's all going to be in there. And that's going to be shared with this provider team over here. And the provider team are going to consume that contract file into their own test. And they're going to replay it. It's a dead simple test. It's like literally 5 lines of code. And all that happens is during that test, they read that contract file line by line, and they make the exact same requests against the actual microservice. So they make those exact same requests to the actual microservice, and they get the actual response. And once they've got the actual response, it's just a diff. They can look at that actual response, compare it to the mocked response that the other team expected, and if they match, perfect. The contract file has been verified, that mock server is doing a great job, and they're happy because their microservice works the way as expected. If they don't match, there's a problem, and the two teams need to talk to each other. Because importantly, consumer-driven teams talk to each other. This won't work if your teams aren't talking to each other. It requires teams that work on different parts of the system to work together to bring these tests into something that's valuable. So how can you get started using consumer-driven contract testing? Well, funnily enough, we've got Grace here, and she's going to take you through a really great lab that's going to give you the opportunity to get hands-on and try this technology. But the lab is based on Pact, which is personally my favourite way of writing these types of tests. There are other options in the marketplace now. I know that Postman have an equivalent that you could use. But the reason I like Pact is that it's open source, so you can just go to GitHub, you can have a look at what puts that together. You can also have support for many different languages. So quite a common thing that happens, in my experience working with clients, is you might have the Android team, as I spoke about before, doing their thing, consuming APIs. They want to write tests. So they'll write their tests in Kotlin, because that's the language they like. But then the API team might be writing those APIs in Java. Well, in traditional testing tools, that's a problem, because you have to write it all in the same language, but not with Pact. There's a library for both. So they can use whatever language they like, suits them, because ultimately they all generate a contract file at the end, and that's just what needs to be passed around. In Pact, contract files are just known as Pact files. That's the only difference from the example I showed you before. And finally, it also has this Pact Broker that we'll talk about a bit in the lab, I think. And the Pact Broker is a great way of sharing contract files, because one of the problems you may find when implementing this in teams is how do you share around all these JSON files? It's going to get a bit messy. The Pact Broker helps you do that. So let's talk briefly about how you share Pact files. There's 3 different options available to you, including a 4th, which isn't listed here because it's a cloud-hosted service. So you can start off with the file system. File system is a dead easy way of doing this. It takes all of 5 minutes. You can just set it up, but it's not very scalable, and there's no overview. If you've got loads of different teams, you're working in a big organization, and you may be generating 100 Pact files a week, all of them going into a file system is going to get messy. So perhaps you can set up a cloud-hosted bucket on AWS or GCP or, dare I say, Azure. You can put a bucket there, and you can just upload them to the bucket. And that can kind of scale because you can have lots of storage, you can have file permissions, but it's not great. So my preferred choice, and the one that we'll probably talk about, is the broker. The broker is a separate service, and its sole job is to handle passing around Pact contract files. And so it will handle things like versioning, conflicts, knowing when to run the other team's tests. It even supports webhooks. So you can set up a webhook to trigger a CI/CD pipeline somewhere and move on with your testing. So these are a couple of screenshots from the Pact Broker. You can see some of the nice things it also generates you around documentation. Weatherman again, so you've got this one over here, where you've got the services and a nice diagram showing the relationships between those services, how that system comes together and brings value, so you can see which service speaks to which. And then if you wanted to dig in and understand, okay, well, how does service, very catchy name 17, talk to, what is that, 4, service 4? How do they talk to each other? Well, it generates this documentation over here where you get this really nice step-by-step auto-generated documentation of the zoo app works with the animal service and it makes requests for this, for this, for this, using these types of interactions. Brilliantly useful with both developers who are trying to understand how their clients consume their API, but also with maybe non-technical members of the team. Because if you just ignore that bit, that's all English. You can read that. So my experiences from the field of using this technology with clients, both the good and the bad. So there's no environment orchestration. That's probably one of the biggest selling points of Pact. You no longer need an integration environment because you're doing integration testing asynchronously. It's a hard word to say. So you're doing it asynchronously. You're passing around those contract files. And so you don't need an integration environment. You can just use the setup stubs that teams already have. There's no slow and brittle tests because it's just unit tests working together, communicating. That means they're tightly scoped and you're not waiting on a massive end user scenario. And if they fail, it's probably an issue because of that tight scope. Because you're not testing 10, 20, 100 things at once, you're just testing one thing at once, one relationship. So if it goes wrong, it's probably a problem. But it does come with some negatives, I suppose. To start with, there's a network effect. As you probably saw from that diagram before with all those services talking to each other, well, that diagram's not very useful if there's 2 services. So you need as many teams as possible bought into this idea. The more teams you have, the better you can map your system, the better you can test it. And there's a learning curve as well, but that's why you're here today. There's a bit of a learning curve with Pact because it's a bit different to integration testing of old, and there's a few different moving parts that you won't have come across before, but it's honestly not too bad, and Grace will do a great job of taking you through it. And then finally, another team can break your pipeline. This is the one that teams are really scared of, particularly provider teams. Because a client now is generating their test cases, and those test cases get brought into the provider's CI/CD pipeline, and the pipeline fails. But it was nothing to do, potentially, with what that provider team did. It might be that the client team used that API in a really stupid way that it would never support. But you know about it. And you'd rather know about clients using your API in a way that makes no sense, because you can go talk to them about it. You can say to them, why did you send a request that looks like this? We'll never support that. And maybe there's a miscommunication there. You can get to the bottom of it. It highlights it. So to wrap up, relationships are more important than microservices themselves. We often focus on microservice architecture. We don't talk about the relationships and systems, and that's what Pact is going to help you solve. So test your relationships and talk to each other. So any quick questions before we get into the lab? All very quiet. I either did a really good job or I scared all of you. All right, cool. Over to you, Grace. Thank you.
Ah, wait. I kind of broke it. All right, well. Oh, it's back.
Thank you.
You're not even in the room.
Okay, yeah, so I'm Grace. I'll be taking you through the hands-on lab with Pact. It's going to be in C#.NET. Don't worry if you don't know C# or .NET. It's going to be a very beginner-friendly lab. But yeah, so we should be fine. But if you get stuck or need a hand or just want to chat to someone, we have some people at the back in blue that might be able to help you. But also, if you just raise your hand, I can also try and help as well with questions. And for those joining us online, we do have support there online as well. Okay, so to get started, you're going to need to get your instances. So I think there is a link there that you can go to, but it should also be on the meetup page, I believe. But if not, I will go to it myself. So it's lab.devopsplayground.org. So if you go to this URL, you'll just need to enter your Meetup username, and then you'll be able to get the details for your instance. Raise your hand, and or Patrick's right behind you, so hopefully he'll be able to just give you an instance, and we'll be able to get one created for you. So there's no worries there. Same with online. If you're joining online and you haven't signed up to Meetup, just put a message in YouTube or preferably in Slack, and we will be able to help you there.
Oh, that's why you want that one. So you have to Patrick.
Cool. All right. So.
It's just my name.
Good. I'm glad.
Okay.
Yeah, so you have to ask he's got experience.
But you tested it. It's on
What do you want to do? Talk. Hello, I'm talking. Is that stopping the buzzing? I need to speak loudly. Is that better? Okay. Okay, so if you've got your instance details and the links, you'll need to open up 2 Weti terminals for this playground. So just copy the link that you have for Weti and open a new tab with that. And you can log in as well with your password. Cool. Is anyone struggling with getting in? Okay. I'll go to here and keep that up.
If you don't have one yet, happy to add it.
Yeah, please, yeah. I think this is...
Oh, that's good, yeah. So, if you copy the email on the top, that will be your code editor. And another one will be your terminal. And the Pact 08 exclamation point is the password for the user.
Okay, please. So, okay. This is the password.
So you'll probably need it once more because we have some pseudo commands. You'll need a password for this one. Yeah, so just... Okay, so the code editor is linked to that instance, so basically whatever you edit there will be happening there as well.
Cool. think so. All right, so this playground's based on our playground hands-on with Pact.net repo. So you can follow along with the README as well if you get lost or fall behind. I'll just scroll down. So quick introduction, what we're going to be doing during this lab. So we're going to be running a backend API, which is a spirit animal backend API. And then we've got a front-end console application, which is going to call that backend API. When we're writing our Pact tests, we're going to write the consumer tests, and we're going to make a Pact file, and we're going to write provider tests. We're then going to verify that it all works. Then we're going to break the tests, so that's going to be fun. And then we're going to fix them again, we're then going to go to Pact Broker and publish our Pact file to a Pact Broker, and then finally run the provider tests with the Pact file in the Pact Broker. Cool. So that's kind of what we're going to go through. Just like a quick summary here of this wonderful diagram that I have taken from the Pact.io website. So I think it shows a really good way of how it works. So we've got the consumer tests. They're running independently. They make the contract file, which is the Pact file. And then the provider tests will run, again, separately by themselves. So to get started, we're going to try and run the backend API. So we have a bit of an idea of what we're going to be working with and testing. So to do that, we need to go to your WETI terminal. I'm going to enter the command ls so I can see where I am. And then I'm going to enter the command cd into work directory. Try and be careful with typos. Okay, and then I'm going to do another ls again. And this time I'm going to cd into hands-on with Pact.net. Instead of having to write it all, I'm just going to press the tab key so it will autofill for me. And there we are. And now I will ls again. Okay, so now we've got a bit of a folder structure for this playground. So we've got Pact Consumer. Let me just make this bigger. There we go. So we've got Pact Consumer, Pact Provider, Pact Broker, Playground CLI, and Spirit Animal Backend. So we want to take a look at the Spirit Animal Backend. So let's cd into that folder, Spirit Animal Backend. All right. Oh, I spelled it wrong. And I'll tab just because I can't type. Okay, so I'll ls, and we can now see some more folders, and we've got some app settings. Great. So one more thing we need to do before we can run our backend API is we need to change a part of the launch settings. So if you go to the code terminal, if you get this pop-up, just click trust. I hope you will trust me. I promise there's nothing dubious in here. So if you go to the Spirit Animals folder in the Explorer, what we want to update is the properties folder with launch settings.json. Okay, and in this file, if you scroll down to Profiles, Spirit Animal Backend, and then Application URL, you'll see the text, Your Panda. You need to replace this with the Panda that's in your URL for your instance. So don't do Funny Panda, that's my one. It might not work if you replace with Funny Panda, but I'll do that. Okay, so once that change has been made, I'll just give a couple more seconds. Yep. And then go back to your WETI terminal. That's the only change we need to make to the backend. So once you're back in your terminal where you have the spirit animal backend folder that you've CD'd into, so I'm doing terminal 1, my first terminal, we now need to run the command .NET run, and this will start the backend API. So. Okay, so that should now be started. So to be able to take a look at the backend API, we're going to take a look at the Swagger documentation. So you want to copy the URL that you're using for your instance, and then / with Swagger at the end. Cannot get Swagger. Oh dear.
Different port.
Different port, yes. Thank you. It is port 3000, I think. It's doing something, so I think it's port 3000. I can zoom in, but it's not going to change anything. Right, okay. So I'm getting some, maybe some caching issue. So I'm going to open this. And I'm going to go to application. Just one moment while I debug this.
And right click on the little stop button with this open. It will
Right click.
on the stop button.
It's not letting me right click.
Okay.
I can click the X. Oh, okay. I needed to refresh. Thanks. All right. So hopefully everyone else has managed to get the Swagger document to appear. Got the same issue.
How did we get over that caching thing that you resolved?
Yeah. So first try just clicking the X and doing a refresh. If that, hopefully that will work for the majority of people. If not, let us know and we can give you some further information or help. All right. So,
Sorry, did you need to delete the cache or something?
have you tried refreshing? Yep. Okay. So if you refresh and it still doesn't work, you can go to Inspect and then the Application tab. And then I clicked, there's underneath cache, there's cache storage. So I right-clicked on it and then I get the refresh option. That was all that I did. And then I did a refresh. And then it should work. Yeah. Cool. Okay, has everyone managed to get their Swagger open? Okay. While we're waiting, we can take a look through the Swagger for those of us that have managed to get it open. So on the Swagger, you can see that we've got some methods for making API requests. So we've got get, post, get again, and a put, and a delete. So get and post are against the spirit animal endpoint, and then these ones are against spirit animal button ID. So if you drop down on the get spirit animal, you should be able to get a bit more information. And we can see we expect status code 200 from this request. So what we can do to try it out is click this button, try it out. So I will click that, and then you get another button called execute, and then I'll click that button to execute it. All right, and then we should get responses. So if you go to the responses, you should receive status code 200, meaning success, and then some response headers. Cool. This is interesting, but it's not given us anything. That's because we have no spirit animals, so we need to create some. So if we go to post, and click on the drop down, and then again, try it out. Here you will see that you can put in a request body. I'm going to fill it out with a number. I'll give it, let's go for 3. I'll give it ID 3. And then a name, so a name of your spirit animal. It could be, I don't know, I'll go with dog. And then a color, I'll go with white. Okay, so once you've filled out the request body, you can click execute. And you should receive a 201 status code. And then the response should echo back that spirit animal object that you just sent to the API. So I can see it's come back with 3, dog, and white. Perfect. Hopefully everyone else has received the same. So now that I've given it a spirit animal, let's see if we can get spirit animals now. So I'm going to click execute one more time and scroll down, and I can see it has returned my spirit animal that I just created. So those are just the post and get requests. You can also do the get endpoint with try it out, and then you can use that ID of the spirit animal you just created, and again execute, and then similarly you should receive back that spirit animal. All right, so now we've had a little bit of a look at the API, what it does, what it returns. We can start taking a look at writing some consumer tests for this API. But first thing, let's look at what the front end does. So before I get ahead of myself, if you go to your second terminal that you opened, so you want to make sure you're in Playground at Playground and not the other one where it's running the backend like this. So your free terminal, make sure you're on that one. And then we're just going to do another ls. I'm going to cd into workdir, and another ls, and cd into hands-on with pact.net, and another ls. Okay, and we can see these folders, and we want to go into the Playground CLI. So I'm just going to, before I do that, I need to do a cd Playground CLI. Okay, and then an ls, and then we can see a couple files there. There's not very much to our front end application. We're still developing. We're still going along to consume this API that we've been given, but we can still run it. So let's do the command again, .NET run. So with a little bit of time, it should then produce some output in white text. So we can see it puts out starting, I'm trying to highlight, that's not working. Starting DevOps Playground Spirit Animal API, API URL, and then we've got the Spirit Animal endpoint, and then I don't know why it's doing it like this, but we're still developing. It's still a bit buggy. That's why testing is so good, and you need multiple types of testing as you're developing. But anyway, we can see some more information here. We've got Spirit Animal at 1. We've got ID 0. It shouldn't be returning ID 0. It should be returning an ID 1. Oh well. And then we've got the panda color red. And then we've got all spirit animals, and you should notice the spirit animal that you created earlier in that Swagger document has shown up here as well. So that's cool, there's 2 spirit animals now. And then it updated the spirit animals, and then right at the end, unfortunately, it's deleted your spirit animal. So sorry about that. All right, cool. So that's the front end. Now we can look into writing some consumer tests. So if you just cd ... to navigate out one directory, and then just follow that up with an ls so we can be sure where we are. We now want to go into cd pact.consumer. Okay, and for now we're done with Wetty, and we'll be going back to the code. So if you go back to your Visual Studio Code URL, we're also done with launch settings, so you can close that if you wish to. And we want to take a look at Pact Consumer. I think my mic's gone. Oh no, it's still going. Okay, and then if you click down to utils, we can take a look at the mock provider. We're not going to be touching anything in this file, but it's good to have a bit of an idea of what's going on when we're mocking and running our tests. So there's not too much code in here, but it might be useful to have a bit of an idea of what's going on. So we've got a mock server port of 3001, and we've got a Pact builder, which is going to be our mock provider server, and that's using version 3. And then we're going to create a Pact config, and in this Pact config, we're going to specify a Pact directory. So this is the file path where we want the Pact files to be saved. So it should be saved in a folder called pact/pacts. If you have a look, there shouldn't be any folder called pact/pacts currently. So don't worry, that's supposed to be how it is for now until we run the tests. Okay, and then we've got some default JSON settings and some outputters. And then we then create or initialize the mock provider server with the Pact version 3 specification. And then a little bit more importantly, let me just scroll this out and zoom in a bit. There we go. You'll see I'll pass some values through, some strings. So we've got spirit animal consumer. So this is to specify the consumer of the Pact file, or the Pact test, sorry. And then we've got spirit animal provider to specify the provider side of the tests. And then we pass through that config that was created a bit further up in the code. And then we pass through the mock server port. Cool. So that's it with the mock provider. Is there any questions on this file so far? No, okay, good. All right, so with that, we can take a look at the test. So if you go to Pact Consumer Tests, Spirit Consumer Test, sorry, we can see that there is a test file that has been mostly written out. So quite a lot of the setup's already here, and we can just go through it. So we've got a client. So this client is that front-end Playground CLI that was running. So that's a creation of the client. And then we've got the port, again, 3001. This needs to match the port that was in the Pact provider test so that they are able to talk to each other. Cool. And then we've got some min-max type matcher, which is spirit animals, and then an object, spirit animal. So if we take a look at spirit animal, it's an object, and we've got the ID, because the spirit animal has an ID, and it has a color, and it has a name. What we're doing here with type matcher is we're telling it we care about the type of the value or the data that's being given back. We don't care about what the value is, so we don't care that it is 10, but we care that it's a number. And the same with the type matcher for red. We don't care that it's red, we care that it is a string, and so on. So it's not matching the values here, we're matching the types of the values. And then here with the min-max type min-max type matcher, we pass through a spirit animal which already has the type matchers inside of it. So we're layering in type matchers, building up our complexity of the object. And here we're specifying we expect a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 2 spirit animals objects to be returned. So that's, sorry about the mic playing up. I think it's dead. Anyway, yeah, okay. So with that, oh, it's back again. Yeah, so remember maximum of 2. That's important. If you put 3 in, it might fail. So maximum of 2. Do you want me to wait a bit? We're having some technical issues.
So what's the maximum 2?
So you can put more here, but what matters is when we go to write the tests that we only give it 2 objects into it. But we'll see that in a moment. So you can put more if you wanted to, but just remember maximum 2 if you don't change it. Remember maximum 2 for now, and it'll become clear later. Yeah. Is the audio all right? Okay, I've been given a thumbs up, so I'm going to keep going. All right, so now we're going to create our client. We're going to pass through the URL with localhost and the port which matches the mock provider. All right, so that's all the setup. Now we need to add in some tests. And to make life a little bit easier, you can go to the README file. If you've not got it open already, it's github.com/DevOps Playground /hands-on with Pact.net. Okay, and then I'm going to scroll down until I get to the point where it says Pact Consumer Tests, which is here. So I'll keep scrolling. We've already done mock provider, so we've looked at that. And we're on 2.2, Spirit Consumer Test. If in doubt, another way you can easily get to it is if you just go to GitHub, and then we can search DevOps with camel Playground. And you click enter, and then find one that says DevOps Playground. That's just my old playground that I did. But then click back to DevOps Playground here. So you get to the DevOps Playground homepage of the thing. And you click repositories, and then you should see as the first one, hands-on with Pact.net. And if you click there, then you'll be able to scroll down to the README. Cool, so I'm going to go back and try and find 2.2. Okay, I'll make it a bit bigger. All right, has everyone managed to get the README open? Okay, I see some nods, so I'll go ahead. Oh, sorry, it's 2.3. All right. So this is the code block for the first test. If you can use the little icon here to copy it, or you can select and copy as you would normally. And then if we go back to the VS Code URL, and we're just going to paste that code that we just copied into the test block for get all spirit animals. All right. So I'm just going to go through what we have here for this test. So we start with the arrange step, and the arrange step's quite big, but what we're calling is our mock provider server, which we created, which is going to be running the mock of the server. And we're going to tell it, upon receiving and then we're going to specify the string, a request for all spirit animals. So this is how we're describing the request of the test. You can think of this as your test title. And then we've got another one called given. Spirit animals exist. Given here will translate into the Pact state, the provider state, sorry, for when the test's running. So it will tell Pact when it's running with the provider how to set up the state for the test. So when you're thinking of testing, for example, when we tested the Swagger and we just clicked get, there was nothing there. So we need to set it up with something before we start our test to be able to test what we're trying to test. So that's what this is for. And the spirit animal exists will become relevant later on when we go to the provider tests. But for now, it's a nice description of a setup that we expect, which is a spirit animal exists. Okay, and then with request, this is the request we're going to make. So we're going to make a HTTP GET request to the spirit animal endpoint. And now we're going to set up how we expect the response to be. So we're going to expect it will respond, and it will respond with a status code OK. And OK means status code 200. So we expect that. And then we can also set up the headers that we expect to receive. And then we can also set up that we expect a response body to be returned, which is a with JSON body. And here we pass through the spirit animals that were set up before with the min-max and the type matches. Cool. Any questions with that, with the arrange section? All right, I'll move on. Oh, gosh, it's starting again. So with the act assert block, here we're going to start and run the test, and we're going to create a Pact file. So we're going to call again the mock provider server with verify async, and we're going to get through CTX. And what we're going to do is we're going to call client get spirit animals. So this is a function from the client that we're directly calling. So with unit testing, you can directly call functions in the application you're testing. So this will ensure that there's nothing wrong with that function itself as well. So it should all go through and be OK, and we'll capture that in this response. And then what we'll do is just a very quick assertion just to check that our setup's correct. There's no obvious error in the code that's stopping it from making a request. And yeah, we'll just check that it returns back with 200. Because the main part of this is the contract, the relation that we're testing. So this isn't the test for testing individual functions. You still would need your unit tests there as well. Here we're trying to just test the relation between the two services talking to each other. All right, any questions? I'll take that as a no. OK, so now let's copy the second test before we move on. So I'm just going to go back to the README and scroll down to 2.4 get spirit animal test. So I'm just going to copy that in and put it into the second test. Get spirit animal, and just paste it there. Okay. Okay, now I'm going to quiz you with a little game. So it's called Spot the Difference. What can you see that is different between these two tests? Can anyone see any difference? I'll scroll a bit. So let's take a bit of a look at the arrangement. So we've got mock provider service upon receiving a request for all spirit animals. Here we've got mock provider server upon receiving a request for spirit animals. Okay, so the title's different. That's good. Is there any other differences that anyone can see? That's an easy one. Any volunteers?
Voice of the internet, the file path, and the number 10.
File path.
/10.
Yes, the endpoint, yes. That's right, yeah. So we're calling 10 on the spirit animal endpoint. Yeah. And there should be 2 more differences. One might be, actually, these 2 differences are quite difficult to be able to easily spot, to be honest. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so we're just sending through spirit animal, which is just that object, just the spirit animal, because we're just calling the one spirit animal, the spirit animal at 10, which is why it's been given the ID 10. Cool, yeah. And then, yeah, one small difference, again, is the given setup, because we want the setup to be different, because we want just the one returned. So given a spirit animal exists. It could probably work with the same given request, so you could reuse it. If you feel adventurous and want to try that out, you're welcome to. That's part of the fun of playing with things and finding out what works and what you can reuse. So we're all for reusing. Okay, great. Yeah, and then one more difference again is we pass through, we call get spirit animal, and we pass through 10 on the client function. So just a couple of differences between the 2 tests, but mostly similar, like the setup and the process that you call and the methods that you use are pretty standard and mostly the same. All right, so with that, if you go back to WETI, to your Pact consumer WETI, and then we can now run our consumer tests. So the command to run it is .NET test. So if you click that, it should start to run the test. It might take a little bit of time. Cool. All right, so mine's completed. At the end, you should see in green at the bottom, passed 2. So that's great. Our test passed. Yeah, that's all we care about for this in this output.
We've got a question.
Yeah.
Is the text in the given statement relevant, or is it just to make English easier for you?
Yeah, it's relevant. Yeah. You could use it without a given step if you don't want any previous setup. But for this purpose, it is relevant. We'll move on to that in just a moment when we do the provider tests. So you can see. But yeah, it's good. Remember the given part, because that's really important. All right, so we've run our tests. Now, if you go back to Visual Studio Code, you should see there's a new folder that's been created called Pact, Pacts, and then you've got this file. And you might notice some things in here, such as the file name. We've got Pact Spirit Animal Consumer and Spirit Animal Provider. If anyone can remember from the mock provider, here is the values of how we specified those. So we're naming the relation, the Spirit Animal Consumer, and then the Spirit Animal Provider. And then it's also here in the JSON, Consumer. It's the name, Spirit Animal Consumer. And then we've got some interactions in the JSON. So the description is that title that we put, the upon receiving. So that's gone as a description, or you could think of it as well as your test title. And then we've got a section called provider states. And then that has a spirit animal exists. So that's taken from the given method. And then we've got the request, get spirit animal 10, and then there'll be further down, there'll be the other one. And then we've got response with the body, and we've got color, red, ID, 10, name, panda. So what we expect, if you change JAWS, it might be slightly different. But if you do change it, keep 10, because that's important. We need to keep it at 10, otherwise the test will break. But you can change the color, and you can change the panda if you wanted to. But if you do change it, you might want to rerun the consumer test so that the Pact file updates. All right, anyway, just a little bit of more information. And then we've got something interesting. So we've got matching rules. So this is how Pact has interpreted how we set up that object with the type matches. So here it's interpreted it and it's written it out in some somewhat readable, understandable information, but it doesn't matter if we don't fully understand it because it's important that Pact can read it. But we can see it's matching and it's matching type. It's doing some generic type matching. But we can see there's ID and there's color and then there's name. So we can look at it and we can verify that it's interpreted it as we expect. And that's all that matters. And then there's also a status of 200. Cool. All right. So with that, we can now move on to the provider tests. So for the provider test, keep your Pact Consumer WETI terminal there. That's fine. Go to the one where you're running the .NET backend. And when you've got that open, you want to do Control-C to end the process. So once you've killed that, you can CD out of Spirit Animal backend because we're done with the backend, and then just do an ls. Then we want to CD to pact.provider. Great. So when you're in that folder, you can go back to your Visual Studio Code window. I'm just going to close these to keep things a little bit clean. And I'm going to go to Pact Provider in the Explorer. And then we're going to, again, have a little bit of a look at some of the setup. But we're not going to look too much into the setup because this would then drag on for maybe 3 hours. And I don't think anyone wants to be here for that long. So we'll just have a little bit of a look so we get a bit of an idea of what's going on. So we can take a look at the provider state middleware. So I'm going to ignore a couple things in here deliberately, but if you're curious and want to find out more, I really encourage taking some extra time and looking into those things. But for now, we'll just go over a couple things that are important. So here we've got a repository, which is the Spirit Animal repository. So similar to when we're doing the consumer tests, we had the client, which had the functions that the front-end Playground CLI used. The Spirit Animal repository is the functions from the backend, so the API, the Spirit Animal API. So that's how we're going to call the functions on the backend that they use for the requests. And then we set up some provider states. This is where the given part was really important. So provider states, so you'll notice we've got Spirit Animal exists and a Spirit Animal exists. So this string is used for it to understand what provider state to set up. So here we've passed through a function called Spirit Animal exists. So we're telling it when you have a provider state saying Spirit Animal exists, you want to run this function to set up the state. So if we scroll down, we can see these two states are empty, well, functions, sorry, are empty. So we need to fill these out. All right, so to make things a little bit easier, we can go back to the README and scroll down until you're at provider tests and setting provider states. Nope, we're going to skip that one. We're already past there. Yeah, so it's here we've got both the functions already set up. I'm just going to click this one and paste it in here. Okay, so what we've got here is a cleanup call to the function. And this is just going to make sure that the state is 100% clear. We don't want anything in there that could affect the outcome of the test. So we want full control of what's happening. So we're just going to make sure all the Spirit Animals are deleted by calling delete all Spirit Animals, just in case there's something that's gone in there. So, yep. And then we're going to call post Spirit Animal function on on the repository. And here we're going to pass through spirit animals mock unicorn, and we're going to call it one more time with spirit animals mock dog. Cool. So this is going to set up some spirit animals, a spirit animal that's a unicorn and then one that's a dog. Okay. And then for spirit animal exists, because it's going to be easier, I'm just going to write it, clean up. And again, I'm going to go repository and dot, and then post spirit animal. Okay. Now, if we remember, for spirit animal exists, that is the given a spirit animal exists. And I can remember a really important number that we need to make sure is that spirit animal. So if I go to utils, there's spirit animals mock file where we've specified the objects. So we've got panda, unicorn, and dog. And I can see that panda is the one with 10. So I need to use panda for that test. So I will add in here spirit animals panda. Spirit animals mock panda. Cool. And that should be everything that we need for the state to be set for the tests. So I'm going to close that and close this, and then go to the provider tests and open that file. Cool. So we've got a couple variables in here. We've got the provider URL, which is to localhost 3000. We've got the broker URL, just as pre-set up. We've got the Pact path, which is the file path to the specific JSON file that we want to be testing with the Pact file that we created with the consumer tests. So we need to be making sure we're using the correct Pact file. And then, very similar to the setup for the consumer tests, we've got a Pact verifier config, which has got some outputters. And a little bit different here is we've got a web host, and we send through a test startup, and we tell it we want you to use the provider URL, which is what we're expecting to run these tests against. And we build it, and we're going to start it. So that's going to start up the backend with that state already set up with those spirit animals ready. So it's going to hold it all ready in space until it reads through each like objects that we've set up in the consumer. It'll go through them, and then it'll call and set up the state ready, and then it'll test, it'll verify, and then it'll do the next one. So it'll do them one at a time. Cool. All right, so we've just got one test in here that we need to write. And if you remember, Thomas mentioned, for the verifier test, they're quite small in size because we've done so much setup before with that Pact file, with creating it. Really all we need to do is just run our test framework against it. So this is going to be really easy for us. So let's go back to the README and scroll down. And then there's just going to be a code block here that you can copy underneath section 4.2. So if you just copy that code and add it into the test block. And if it's pasted in a little bit strange and you want to make it pretty, by all means go ahead and make sure everything's nicely aligned. Okay, so we're going to create a Pact verifier with that config that we set up earlier. So it's just going to have some outputters in there. And then we're going to just run it. We're going to do our act assert on the Pact verifier. So here we're going to tell it the service provider. So we're telling it, hey, we're the spirit animal provider. And this is the URL that we're going to be running on. And then we're going to say, with the file source, and we're going to tell it, I want you to run the tests that are in this file. So in the spirit animal consumer, spirit animal provider JSON file. And then we're also going to tell it the provider state URL, so it can call that to start call that API to be able to set up the states as it goes through running that file. Then we're going to call the verify, and that will verify everything. Okay, so that should be it. If you go to the Pact provider terminal, you can run .NET test, and then this should run the provider tests. And we expect it to be pass and success. So again, it might take a little bit of time as it gets going. Okay, and then you should see the following output. So we get a request for spirit animals, given spirit animal exists, returns a response, which has status code 200, okay. And content type, with the headers, content type, application JSON, all this stuff, okay. And a matching body, good. It's saying okay, so we can verify that the response received is as expected compared to the type matches in that Pact file. And we've got the second one as well. And then you should notice, however, for past, it's only one, but it did run both the tests. So for each Pact file, it sees that as one test, but it will still run both of them and present it nicely like this as two separate tests. All right, so that's cool. We got things passing. Now let's break them. So we're going to get a request in now. We need to do some more dev. Well, not dev, but we've got a request coming in. And our stakeholder wants us to add size to the spirit animal. They really want to add size. So we're like, okay, the object's going to change. It's going to need size. So if we go to Pact consumer folder, and then if we go to the tests, spirit consumer test, we're going to add in size. So I'm going to go size equals new type matcher. Okay, and double quotes. And here you can enter any size that you like. I'm going to go large. I want it to be a large red panda. So that's what I decide, but you could do small, or you could do any other that you like. Okay, so with that change, I'm going to save it. And now, because there's been a change, we need to update the Pact file. So if you go back to pact.consumer, we need to run our test again because there's been a change. We've now added size, so we need to update things. So let's run .NET test on the Pact consumer. Okay, great. So we should have received passed too. Good, everything's great from our end. On the consumer team, we're happy, everything's green. Okay, so now the provider team, they didn't know that there's a new requirement coming for size. They didn't hear this. So now if we run .NET test and click enter, oh dear, we see some red, and it says failed. So something has broken here. What could have happened? If we scroll up, you should then see the verifier output, and similar to before, that block of text, giving us the specifications. Request for spirit animal exists, given spirit animal exists. Has response code 200, okay, well that was okay, that worked. And the header's all right, but has matching body, failed. Oh no, and that also failed for the second one. This isn't that useful for us to know exactly what's happened, but we can scroll down, and in the failure section, there's a bit more information here. So for has matching body, we've got the error, actual map is missing the following keys, size. Okay, so size has been added. And yeah, so then that's failed the test. No worries. Okay, so yeah, so with that we've broken it. Let's just revert and remove size and save. So if we remove size, we can make the test pass again. So we've been told we can't support size, get rid of size. Okay. And then we'll just run .NET test on Pact consumer, just to refresh that Pact file, because we now need to remove size and revert back. So no more size. Great. So if we go back to the Pact file, cool. It's all back to normal. Color, ID, name, no size. Great. All right. So we've looked at Pact files with local. So we've given it the direct file path. Now we can take a bit of a look at the Pact Broker. So, for example, like the consumer and the provider team, they probably wouldn't be using the same repository, so they might not be able to just easily use the same file path. So that's where the Pact Broker comes in. So if you cd out of the Pact consumer folder, and then we're just going to do an ls, you should see a folder called Pact Broker. So we just need to cd into that folder. Cool. There's one thing that we need to update for the Pact Broker to be able to run. So if you go back to Visual Studio Code and then to Pact Broker folder, you should see a Docker Compose file. If you open that, and we scroll down to, let me have a look, hang on. To Pact Broker, and then to Pact Broker base URL. You'll see there's lots of local host URLs specified. If we just scroll along, you will see your Panda, and that'll be there twice. You need to update that with your Panda. That's in your URL that you're using for the instance. So this is my one. And make sure you update that twice, otherwise it may not work. Yeah, that looks correct to me. Cool, and that's everything you need to update on that file. So we can go back to the Pact Broker Wetty terminal. Okay, and now we're going to start the Pact Broker. So we're going to do docker space compose up and then -d. D is for detached, so we're still going to have access to the terminal once it's done. So this will take a while as it pulls all the images that we use for that Pact Broker container. Yeah. Cool. So if it's successful, you should see started output for Pact Broker, Postgres, and Pact Broker, and Nginx. So we can confirm that it's working by opening and going to the Pact Broker URL. So if you copy your URL, you don't need any ports, just without the ports. And it might take a little bit of time, but it should load. If it seems to be taking a bit too long, I will click the X and I will refresh. So mine took a bit too long for my liking, so I just decided to refresh the page. And then it should display. So has everyone got the Pact Broker up and everything? Yeah, I'm getting nods. Cool. So what you will see is there is already a Pact file here. So this is an example one. I'm just going to delete it because I don't need it. I don't want to use the example Pact file. I want to use my file, so I've deleted it.
I think we need to have a Docker installed.
Yes, on the instance, Docker should be installed. You just do docker space compose up. Make sure you're in the Pact Broker. Yeah, and then -d.
Yes, I'm in the Pact Broker directory.
Yeah.
So does my system need to have Docker installed? Docker service installed, or?
Yes, are you using our instance?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
on the Veti.
Yeah, so yeah, it should have
be
it.
in there, right?
Yeah.
Okay, don't seem to get through that.
Have you got Docker with the space compose up -d?
Yeah, I think
It's
I got
working.
it right. Yeah, there was a typo in the command.
Oh, okay,
So,
nice.
excuse me.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, right, so, okay. So once your Pact Broker's running, on that Pact Broker Weti terminal, you want to cd out and just ls. And we're going to check, make sure that Pact's there. So we're now going to upload our Pact file. So the command for that will be in the GitHub README. So we want to scroll down. We've done breaking the contracts. And we've done the reversion. To Pact Broker, we've done the setup. Okay, publishing the pacts. So I've already CD'd out, so I'm just going to copy bottom one. And you need to update the URL when you copy it in, where it says your panda. So if we go to the Weti, yep, so I've got pacts there. I'm just going to go across and just update where it says your panda for the URL with my panda. And then press enter. Cool. So that looked like it worked. So we've got some green text here saying Pact successfully published Spirit Animal Consumer version 1 and provider Spirit Animal Provider. So that's great. We can also now go to the Pact URL that we opened earlier and refresh it, and you should see that there is now Spirit Animal Consumer and Spirit Animal Provider. So that should show up, and that's great. It means you've uploaded it. If we click into it on the file icon, you should see here we've got unknown. And then, but if we scroll down, you might remember from Thomas's presentation, he showed a bit of the documentation that automatically gets created through Pact. So we didn't do any extra work here. It was all done for us, which is fantastic. And we can see some nice text about, given a spirit animal exists, upon receiving a request for spirit animals from Spirit Animal Consumer with this stuff, the Spirit Animal Provider will respond with this stuff. So, yeah, great. Okay. So now we've got that, we want to run the provider tests against this Pact file instead of the local one that we've got. So we're just going to update the provider tests. So if we go back to the README and scroll down, I'm just going to copy and paste the code. And then you just want to replace all of it that's currently in your test file for the Pact Provider API test. And if, like me, it's copied in funny, just use the tabs to tab it all into place. And if you're feeling especially lazy, you can select all of it and press tab, and it will just move all of it together. Cool. Right, so most of the things are still the same. We've still got Pact verifier with the same config. The service provider setup is still the same with the provider URL. The thing that's changed is we've now gone from with the Pact file source to with Pact Broker source, and we've given it the URL, the broker URL. So that will match. It's still localhost because we're still running it all locally, but it could be what we've used here to get access to the Pact file. Right, and then the ports. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Then we've got some options. So we're telling it which version of the consumer we want to be testing against, or which version we want to be getting. So we've just said we want to use the latest. And then we're also publishing the provider version that we're using. So we're saying, hey, we're version 1 of the provider here. That's what we're running. Cool. And everything else is the same. All right, so if we go back to the pact.provider Weti terminal, we can run the test again. .NET test. Yeah. Give it just a little bit of time. Cool. And we should see everything comes back okay. If it doesn't, make sure you have updated your consumer test and the Pact file and removed size. But yeah, we can see everything's come through. So if we now go back to the Pact, where the Pact is at just the root of your URL for mine's Funny Panda, DevOps Playground. You should see there's now a green part for last verified, which says less than a minute ago. So it looks like it all worked and it ran against the Pact Broker. And just to double check that, we can click through, sorry, not this one, onto the file. And now we can see that unknown has updated to verified. So, yeah. I think that's all that's changed. I think on some views, hang on, let me see if I can find it. If I go here, no, not that one. There's a way that you can see which versions have been run. I think if I go to, on the last verified, click on the green part, there you can see it. So we've got consumer version 1 with latest, and provider version 1, and we can see when it was published and the verification there. If we, no, not that, sorry, one moment. If you go back to home and click on Spirit Animal Provider from home and go to Network Graph, we can see something similar to what Thomas showed in his presentation earlier, but just one. So we've done all this effort and we've just verified one relation. But well, it's all right, we're still growing. But you can see we've verified a relationship here between the Spirit Animal consumer and the Spirit Animal provider. Yeah, so with that, I think we've come to the end of this hands-on section. If you're feeling a bit more adventurous and want to play around a bit more with Pact, there's some suggestions down in the bonus/challenge section, such as you can try and run the Pact tests with a broken consumer by adding back in that size, making the test fail, publishing that Pact file, and then running the provider test again. And then you can have a look and see what happens when tests fail in the broker. And there's also some suggestions for writing some more tests. So if we went back, it should still be up, unless I closed it. The Swagger UI, we can see we've only tested just the get methods. There's also post, put, and delete. So those are other endpoints, requests that you can test with and write some contract tests for. Yeah, so thank you for all attending. Is there any questions? No? I'll take that as a no.
When we had the failure cases and it came up with
yep.
the error messages, were those provided by Pact or were they written? Where it's like matched, maybe like one?
Yeah. Yeah, so it was from Pact doing its internal verification. So with the verifier, it's all wrapped up with this verify function, so it's just going to run it with what it can read from that Pact file against what it's sending, and it will go, is this matching based on the JSON language? And if it's not, it will just fail and be like, there's something wrong, this was what was wrong.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks. All right. Yeah. So thanks for. Oh, yeah.
So we generate the Pact file from the consumer,
Mhm.
and we test the provider against that, right?
Yeah.
Is there a reason why you generate the Pact from the consumer and not the provider, or was just randomly choose for the sake of the test?
Yeah. So it's about that relation. So it's what is being the consumer. So you could have a two-way relation where an API is both a provider and a consumer. But for this, the consumer, which is just calling that API, which is the Spirit backend, that was our Playground CLI. The provider was never calling anything from the Playground CLI application. So that's why it was the consumer, and then the Spirit Animal backend was the provider, because it was delivering the Spirit Animals. Cool. All right. I think that's everything. Thank you all for attending. It's been a great turnout. I hope you learned something and enjoyed it. For those watching online, I'm going to be very cheeky and ask for you to subscribe and maybe hit the like button if you're really enjoying it. Yeah, I said it. Yeah, it'll help the algorithm. Okay, yeah, thanks everyone. And yeah, keep learning.